Hi everybody, this is part 2 of the two-part video by me, David Shapcott, on my view that the Americans lost the war in Vietnam due to their toxic war culture. Now, war doesn't bring out the best in us. It reduces us to the lowest incarnation of ourselves. And so, in a war, in order to ensure that, because, you know, as they say, when wars begin, you release the dogs of war and you can't haul them back in very easily. But wars have been fought where the officers kept a really strict rein on the men and didn't allow them just to go in for a wanton gratuitous slaughter and mayhem. And if the officers don't do that, then the men form their own war culture, which the officers in America then turned a blind eye to, made no attempt to rein in or change, and this toxic war culture began to develop. And when the troops arrived in Vietnam, they came from a very, very low base. 1960s America was a racist, white supremacy society. That the view was that white American culture was the epitome that everyone should aspire for, and every other culture was lesser, and every other person other than white Americans were also lesser. So when the Americans arrived in Vietnam, at the very best, they had no respect for the Vietnamese and their culture. At the worst, they had a murderous hatred and disregard and contempt for what they saw in Vietnam. So that is the low base that they began from. And as the war progressed, their hatred towards the Vietnamese, their contempt for them as fellow human beings just dropped further and further and further, and the officers never reined that in. So that although each of the Americans only had to last for 1 year on their field of duty, tour of duty, they developed a culture that the new people then came into, and the people who were already there would insist you adopt this culture and you accept it. So, for instance, one of the American soldiers who went there at the beginning of '67 said when he arrived, his first assignment was to go out and wait for the trucks to bring the villagers in. That the trucks had gone out to one of the villages, rounded everybody up, put them onto the backs of the trucks. Now these villagers were not identified as Viet Cong or North Vietnamese regulars or as NLF, anything like that. The supposition was that at least some of them would probably know about the activities of the enemy in the area. So they were taken in to be questioned. They weren't the enemy. So they arrived on the backs of these trucks, all handcuffed, and immediately the soldiers jumped up in the trucks, picked them up, smashed them down on the ground, breaking arms, breaking legs, smashing noses. Women and children are screaming, old men are crying out in pain. And this young fellow just arrived in Vietnam and yelled out, "Hey, stop that immediately, cut that out, that's not on." And one of the guys who'd been there a long time just grabbed him, threw him up against the wall and said, "You shut the F up. You don't know what's going on around here. Until you do, I've been here for a few months, you just keep your mouth shut and just follow our lead." He said, so I did. And sure enough, after a few months there, that sort of thing didn't bother me at all. In fact, I was doing worse than that. You know, my friends and I were going out into enemy territory where we could be killed at any point, and we began to think, well, if we can be killed at any point, stuff it. We'll do exactly what we like. Anything we want to do, we're going to start doing. And of course, things sort of got worse and worse and worse with that sort of attitude, and no officers reining the men in. And then in 1968, at the end of the Tet Offensive, the Americans won it hands down. Almost all the NLF fighters, or the Viet Cong fighters as they called them, had been killed off. The North Vietnamese army was severely bruised, headed on back up north. And into this scene came Lieutenant Cayley and his merry band of men. And they set up shop along the coastal area south of Hue, where there were no Viet Cong at all. They could have had a dawdle for a year, just a holiday. They could have wandered off on the patrols they were told to go on. No one around, no hostiles at all. Off to camp at night, get drunk, into the city to visit the brothels the Americans had set up for their troops. Oh, what fun. Back to the States after a year. We were heroes, we fought a grim war, and we've got all this bullshit stories to tell you. They could have done that. But they had entered into a toxic war culture, and they soon picked up on it. And as they said at the My Lai inquiry, after we'd been there for a few days, we began to think, I wonder what it would be like to kill someone. Since there are no Viet Cong to fight and kill, let's have a look around and see if we can't find someone else. Oh look, over there, in the fields, there were some farmers there. Up at the machine gun, kill them. Oh, what fun. And when they went on their patrols through the villages, a number of men said to Cayley, look, we're sex offenders, child molesters. We want to go at the end of the group of men going into the villages, and when you have made sure there are no hostiles around, we'll just start gang raping who we like. Cayley said, fine by me. And that's what they started doing. Now, even without a PhD in psychology, I'm sure anybody out there can figure out that is really going to annoy people. And they're going to want to kill you. And anyone who is out trying to kill you, they will support. And if they can buy guns on the black market to kill you, they will do that. And sure enough, after a little while, Cayley and his men came under fire and sustained some casualties, brought on by their own behaviour. Then one day they were out on patrol and they walked into a minefield that had been laid down by their South Korean allies. They didn't know about it. And as they walked away with their casualties, carrying them back to camp, they were just enraged, and they just wanted to take out their rage on somebody. And since all the enemy were dead in the area, they looked around for someone to take their rage out onto. Oh look, there's a group of women working in the rice fields. Into the rice fields they went, gang raped them and kicked them to death. So by the time they walked through the My Lai village, they had built up a murderous hatred towards all things Vietnamese. And a year after their slaughter there, our newspapers reported that there'd been a massacre, that they had gone and there were no hostiles in the village, and they had just rounded up 508 people in the village and shot them. That's all we were told. What the newspapers didn't tell us, and the media didn't ever mention, which we would have found incomprehensible, was the inhuman cruelty that they perpetrated prior to murdering everyone. Now, anyone who hasn't been in a war situation where the officers just give you a free hand to do whatever you like, wouldn't be able to comprehend how a human being could get this low. You know, ordinary boys could get as low as this, but they can. And what Kaylee's men had done was they went into the village, rounded up a whole bunch of 13 and 14-year-old girls, gang raped them, and then set them on fire, burned them to death. The woman that they were gang raping, they grabbed their knives and stabbed the woman in the vagina afterwards. Old men, old ladies, they tortured and threw them into the well. You know, how could people behave like that, you ask yourself? Well, you know, they can. Good toxic war culture, when you're given a free hand to do what you like, you can do that. So at the inquiry, Kaylee's men all confessed and admitted everything they'd been doing. And reporters afterwards questioned some of them and said, you guys in there, you just admitted you'd been gang raping women and girls. Don't you think you should be convicted for that? And one of them said, what, for rape? Come on. You could nail just about any soldier who'd been to Vietnam, you could nail him for that. Now, that is a war crime under the Geneva Conventions, and armies are expected to ensure their men do not commit that war crime. No effort was made by the officers in Vietnam to stop their men, their wholesale rape. Now, into this toxic war culture came the New Zealand and Australian troops. Now, I only met 2 New Zealanders who had served in Vietnam. The first was a doctor, and when he came back to New Zealand, he bought a house near the university and encouraged university students to flat with him. And myself and some friends, we did. What we didn't know about this guy was he was a child molester. Before he'd gone to Vietnam, he'd been raping his prepubescent girls, his daughters. They reached the age of puberty, he lost interest, he went over to Vietnam. Under cover of war, he continued his attacks on prepubescent girls. Unfortunately, we introduced him to hippies from the Coromandel communes. He went out to the communes, set up shop there, and started raping these unsupervised children. And he was eventually caught, convicted, and sent to Rolleston prison for child molesters for 4 years. The other guy had been a soldier, and I met him when I was working on a road construction crew on the Southern Motorway in Auckland. And he used to entertain us during our breaks with what he had got up to in Vietnam, all of the times that he had been to these American run brothels that they set up for the troops, and he paid for sex a lot. But when he was out on patrol, he just took the view that, hey, there's no brothels around here, so I'll just rape any of the women we come across in the villages. And he talked a lot about the gang rapes him and his fellow New Zealanders went in for. And the last person he gang raped was a girl he estimated to be about 12 years old. Now, other New Zealanders knew what this kook was up to, knew what, and I either joined in or they knew and just kept stum. You know, don't rat on your mates type of attitude. And the officers clearly just turned a blind eye to him. Now, he made friends with the Americans, and the Americans would pop him in their helicopters and take him up of an evening over the free fire zones and give him night vision goggles and a machine gun and say, kill anybody you feel like. And he thought that was just a load of fun to do. The other bit of fun that he enjoyed was going up to the American camp next to a village, and there was a curfew for the villagers. So him and his American mates would sit outside the village, and half an hour before curfew they'd start killing the men and women in the fields. When the sergeant came along and told them off and saying that it wasn't curfew time yet, they'd say, oh, sorry Sarge, our watches must be a bit fast. Ho 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 ho, hilarious fun. Now, by by rights, that idiot should have been arrested. And even if the officers didn't care about what he was doing, he should have been arrested for undermining the war effort, because that sort of behaviour really angers people, and they want to kill you when you do that, and they will support people who are trying to kill you. And no doubt as a result of that coot's behaviour and his American friends, a lot of Allied soldiers were killed by people seeking revenge. And who could blame them? I don't know. I'd have done the same thing too. I'd have been right in there with them, especially if I'd been over in Vietnam. I'd have had no compunction at all about shooting those coots. But let's not go there. That's not healthy thinking. So by the time the American politicians and public had enough of the war, after about 8 years, they hauled the troops back home, and they came back home with their tail between their legs. The Vietnamese were just glad to see the back end of them. As one South Vietnamese woman said to me, when the Americans were here, they just wandered around killing people at random. We were very, very frightened. And you can't, from a base of a liberal democracy, you can't send an army out who does that and expect to sustain it for very long. That type of state terrorism can keep people down, providing it's the official policy of the state, which in a liberal democracy it can't be. Now when the communists came south, many of the South Vietnamese weren't thrilled to bits to see them, but they said to me, at least they were Vietnamese, they were nationalists. They weren't beholden to any foreign power. In fact, after they took over, they told the Russians and the Chinese, we're in charge now, you're out. Thanks for your help, but you're not getting anything from us. You're not getting the military bases on the sea that you want, on seaside that you want. The Russians wanted to set up a navy on the coast of South Vietnam. You're not getting that. And the Chinese wanted lots. You're not getting it. We are nationalists, all foreigners out. So they did appreciate that. And they said, we weren't very happy when they came down here and started killing people and putting them in re-education camps. But at least we knew why. They had big lists of names of people who had collaborated. We knew why these people were being dragged away. But when the Americans were here, you just had to be a Vietnamese and be wandering around. An American could kill you for no reason at all, just arbitrary. That's sort of a form of state terrorism which just can't be sustained, not from a liberal democracy. So that is part 2 of my talk. Please make comments in the sections below about what you thought of it. Thank you.